Now we can bring them in slowly. Hi everybody and welcome to this video. My name is Yannis, and in this video I want to show you how you can turn the Arturia Buchla Easel into some super interesting type of drum machine that creates quite some experimental sounds, but also some super funky rhythms. And I'm going to do this in two parts, because in the first part I'm going to show you which parameters are important and what you can explore, because I can only show you a hint. There are so many modulation possibilities that it's difficult to actually get tired of them. And in the second part of the video I want to show you how you can effectively map those parameters to a MIDI controller, so you can really organically control it and even put the screen aside and feel like you're controlling some actual instrument. So as a first step, of course, we have to load the Buchla Easel plugin. Before we start, we also want to select the default presets so we can create everything from scratch. And if you're kind of new to the Buchla, I also recommend checking out some tutorials of a guy called One Man and His Songs. And he does really excellent in-depth tutorials on all the individual settings. And yeah, this video is just meant to be a little more practical and just to give you some practical examples on how to make drum sounds and drum sequences with it. We also want to just program one note, because that's all we need. Let's maybe pick a C2 and have this played. Now we have just this low note, which actually sounds really cool. Like the initial sound of this is already really beautiful. But we're going to do something else today. And the most important thing is this pulsar, because this is the one we're going to use for our rhythmic foundation for the kind of kick drum type. And we also have to switch this one to pulsar, because this way it kind of oscillates by itself, but still has to be on sync, but it's by default on sync, because this way it's still synced to the MIDI clock. Otherwise it's completely free, which is also interesting, but I always find it a little more easy also if you add some additional envelopes and modulations, if it's synced. So that's what we want. And now we also have to switch the envelope generator to pulsar, because this way the envelope generator always gets triggered when this pulsar is hitting. And also we want to change this to transient, because this is the most punchy type of setting, which for drums is what we want. And now if we play again, you hear that something changed, because now the pulsar is giving us the tempo. And by changing this knob, we can switch the tempo, but it's always going to be synced to the MIDI clock. And here we have the decay, which is important, because the attack has to be at the highest point. Because yeah, here sometimes the lowest point is the highest point of those things. You have to get a little used to that. And also, as some additional information, the sound generator is this red one. I really like those colors here. And we have the complex oscillator, and we can use a second one, which is here, the modulation oscillator, but it's not doing anything so far. We're only hearing this red oscillator. And now we want to add a little bit of this kind of pitch modulation. You see that here by default actually the envelope is already mapped to our two gates that we have here, because we have two gates for two different sounds. Can be two oscillators, but also different things, as you will see. And we're going to connect one of those to the pitch, because you always have sets of two. Like here you can change the pitch, and here you can insert like this controlled voltage that we send some signal to this input, and then here with this knob you can change the amount that is applied to the modulation. So if I play this now, you can hear that this pitch modulation is applied, and let's open. Yeah, this kind of sound goes into this drum direction. And here at this oscillator you can dial in a second sound, and you can change between those three waveforms. I like the triangle one, so now if I do this, we get some more grit. And you can do basically the same with the timbre. Oh, and actually we're clipping a little. Let me reduce the volume a little. I hope it doesn't clip on the screen recording. So now with the timbre we can bring in this kind of distorted character. just bring in a little for some additional overtones, but that's fine. Yeah, like this. And this way we have a kind of kick drum pattern. And this kick drum pattern is our first part. And here on the left side we have a sequencer that we now will route to the pulsar speed. So we need to put in some cable here and insert it here. So now the sequencer has some impact on the rhythm that the pulsar generates. And this is really fun because if they are all on the bottom part, they are kind of neutral. So now nothing changed. And I bring this into like half. And now if I start modulating those knobs, we get some rhythms. Sometimes a bit glitchy. So at the high values it gets a little glitchy, but you need to fine-tune it a little, but you see already how it creates some kind of funky figures. And usually it's better to lower the speed of the pulsar a little, because then you have more chance to kind of digest those rhythms. And it's a bit abstract because you don't, I mean, there's a logic, of course, of how much is applied to the speed, and the higher it is, the quicker it kind of jumps to the next one, but still it's a little abstract. And this way it's interesting because you have to go by intuition a lot and can't really be too calculating of what happens. And that's quite fun. And you can also do the same, apply the same modulator to the timbre, for example. And I want to switch this because it's pre-mapped to the mod wheel, but I want to apply the sequencer because then you also get kind of variations based on the sequence here. That just brings in a little more color, but I don't want this to be too extreme. Just little changes, but I like it to bring in a little more dynamics. For some more crazy figures, because we will later map those to the MIDI controller, so we can control it organically and kind of create drum beats on the MIDI controller without looking at the plugin. But you can also completely randomize it and, for example, use the random voltage, which is basically like some sample and hold frequency. And we want to switch this to sequencer because keyboard means it only gets triggered when we press a key. So you see, we also get some kind of crazy figures. And I like, because we're going to map it to control it with the MIDI controller later, so I'm going to switch this back to this thing. Sorry, there might have been some weird cut because one of my lights was running out of battery, but now it's running again. And now we created our first part. And for the second one, we're going to use noise. And here on the right side under preamp, you can switch between feedback, noise, and external. And if it's in the middle, it's on noise. And also here on gate 2 source, we want to select from preamp because this means we get the signal from here, whatever is selected. And in our case, it's the noise. And now, because also this envelope is mapped to noise, if we dial in this knob, we will just get noise in the rhythm of the bass drum. Which can be cool if you're just looking to generate some weird patterns with like one drum. But we're going to apply a different type of rhythm to it. And here it gets really interesting because this is the kind of thing that is also on the original unit. But then you have this advanced section, and yeah, this one basically gives you so many possibilities that first I thought like I'm never going to touch this because that's too complicated. But then of course I did, and quickly got into it because it's less frightening than it looks like, and you can do super fun things with it. And before we do this, we unmap the envelope from our second sound, and here we select So we have the gates out section, and then we have the gate to level. And this is the one we select. And then we draw a very snappy envelope like this. And I don't think we can remove this one. Anyways, that's okay. Yeah, kind of like this in some, let's say, 16th notes. And see what happens if we apply this. So we have a nice kind of rhythmical hi-hat in 16th notes. That is super cool. And now we can follow this further by adding another modulation. And here you kind of go to the left hand because you can modulate this kind of modulation that you were just creating with this left hand section. And then you go to curve 1 rate sync, because this way we can now modulate the rhythm of the hi-hat, but it will still be synced to the clock, which means we get variations in rhythm that we can again later map to our MIDI controller. So you get really funky figures. And it just directly created this type of envelope, and I like it a lot, so I don't want to change it, but it's kind of intuitive here. So here it sounds almost like people running, or those kind of step dance sounds, which are interesting. And yeah, so here you can just find something that you like, but again, remember that later this will be part of our kind of custom drum machine. You can also play with the speed, so if it's running twice as fast, although here again at some point it's always a bit abstract, so I go fully by intuition, and I'm actually very happy already with what happens here. So yeah, I just leave it this way for now. But again, that's already some example of, you can find so much more here. I'm just giving you some small examples of what's possible. Another thing that is super interesting is now for the third modulation here, you can select curve 1 amount, and now we modulate the amount of this first modulation. And what this does, and I'm going to dial it in fully for demonstration purposes, is that it adds some intensity to a specific position of kind of the whole loop. So we can add some accent to the hi-hat. I call it hi-hat now. You see here. And maybe for making it a little more logical, let's have a pulsar play a very steady rhythm. So now it's like half notes. And let's make it actually, yeah, quarter notes. And let's say we want some accent, like some snare drum on the 2. So here we have to look a little where this 2 would be. And let's say we try here, and we have to switch it on again. And now it would be some offbeat, actually also some cool beat. Actually, I'm gonna leave it this way. And depending on where you put this one and how you put the intensity, you can just fine-tune the sound of this. And also you can apply some randomness. I haven't fully understood those yet, but it basically, yeah, will create sometimes some variations. This was too much already. I want less of it. Again, sometimes I'm not fully sure yet how something exactly works, but I also enjoy this. It's kind of fun of this. And let me actually not do this for this example because it's too random. And here with the speed, you can also see if you like it fast. You always get interesting figures. Later you can also, yeah, this would be like a snare, but it sounds a bit draggy. We can also see how we can map this later to a MIDI controller. Yeah, you could draw more of those accents, but I kind of like this minimal groove. And let's see what else we can do, because we can also modulate the envelope, which is also interesting. So for example, if we modulate the decay rate, we can every now and then bring in a little more tone by the decay being a little longer, or even giving less tone by making the decay a little shorter. And what I like here is to just draw in 3 positions. And here I'm actually going to randomize. So this way it should sometimes just add some random modulations to this decay rate. Yes. And this is actually kind of cool because it also brings in some dynamic. Of course, you can make it more conscious by also drawing some concrete envelopes, but here I kind of like just some randomness. What is good to know right now is that we still have a second kind of level here for just the complex oscillator without any envelope or modulation, actually with the modulation oscillator applied, but not with any envelope. And this means we can kind of bring in some drone, which is also cool to know because you could also just play small melodies. Like if you want to, which is actually cool because this way you have a kind of drum and bass machine. But what I like to do is bring this back to the bottom and now apply this last modulation of the left hand to the gate 1 level, because that's what it is. And then we're going to bring this in, and now we can just open this for a tiny amount. So for example, all the time the bar starts, we can just bring in a tiny bit of note. Like this. Which I kind of like. You can also play with the speed, and here I particularly hear that it could be some cool snare drum replacement. So let's find a spot. Not exactly what I wanted, but this one I also like. Yeah, this is kind of cool. You can always play with the speed. Ha. Lots of potential. Let's go back to this one and have one more look at some other parts. You know, the right hand could be some sequence, so you could, if you decide to not do this weird thing here, but have, for example, the drone, you can also program here a sequence for that drone, which can be super interesting. But this part I'm actually going to leave out now, because we are using this sound just as some short additional step kind of, or layer. And then we have this section where honestly I'm not able to explain this perfectly, but I tried earlier to put a couple of things here and it was really fun. So for example, here I was going to the complex oscillator section, and I think, yeah, to the timbre I applied this one. And sorry for this weird cut, I quickly had to get into this again because it turned out to be completely different to what I had actually prepared. But I like it because it's now some real example of you don't understand everything fully, but it's nice to add those modulations because you feel like you're really creating some unique sound. And I always prefer to have a little bit of this compared to always being completely calculative about what I'm doing. And I mean, yeah, it's just a personal thing. So now this thing you can move around and also change in size. And by making it bigger and dragging it to the left side and adjusting those amounts, we just have some additional variations of like the timbre and the pitch, very tiny. Can actually make the timbre one a bit bigger, but the pitch one can be really goofy. Also interesting if you go lower, but I think a little bit of it is kind of cool. And we have some kind of unique drum line that now you can modulate a lot of things, like also the hi-hat we can always, and we can modulate the kick drum. And there's a lot of modulation here. It has to be a little less. But that's what we're going to look at the next section, because now we're going to map the most important parameters to a MIDI controller and yeah, just make a small kind of drum performance with it. So now for MIDI mapping, you can go to the settings tab on the right side and then to MIDI, and then you just select like some default one, and not default one, empty one. And now it's quite straightforward, so let's actually close this advanced tab and decide what we want to have from the basic page, because what I really like is to have those 5 sliders for setting the kick drum type rhythm. So we just go to learn and map those to those sliders. And now what happens is if we play the clip, we can impact this rhythm. Now this was kind of goofy, just as an example. I also like to have the, or I think it's also cool to have the pulsar speed mapped, so you can also modify this one in comparison to those other ones. So let's do this for the 6th fader. We kind of completely left out the modulation oscillator so far, which is kind of a shame, but you see there are just so many things that sometimes you feel almost like bad for not using something, so to leave something aside, but also there are so many things that I think it's actually a good thing to just focus on what you need for your sound and to always have it in case you feel like, okay, there's something additional I want to add. But I don't know, it's not so necessary so far, although you could also just try making great things with it, of course. And for MIDI mappings, I also find it super important to rather have less controls than too many, because I made those experiences that sometimes it was like, oh, amazing, I have so many knobs, I'm going to assign something to everything, but you know, you just forget unless you use it in exactly the same setting for like all the time. And so, yeah, then you maybe have those knobs, but then you also feel like you have to use them, and then just for no reason you turn knobs. So just think of what you really need. And sometimes it's even more effective to only have two knobs mapped, and we already have way more, but I think it makes sense for this patch. But yeah, to have like 2 knobs mapped instead of just 20 knobs. And now let's go to the advanced section. And here I find it very important to map the tempo of the, let's call it again, hi-hat to 1 fader. So we go to learn again and click on this one and map it to this knob. And now we can really modulate some hi-hat rhythms. For example, I think this is kind of a cool one. I also think it's cool to map this kind of accent, so sometimes we can just take it off. And yeah, this gate 1 level, I just thought I'll leave it out for now. Of course, you can also map it, but I didn't feel like it. This one may be also nice, because this way we can add the randomness to the kick drum decay, or just take it out. And then again, the gate 1 level would also be interesting to map, because this way we can increase or decrease this kind of additional tone that sometimes comes. And honestly, this is quite a good amount of settings already for just starting, because otherwise you quickly get extremely confused. And for example, I mean, also with those knobs, it's a bit tricky that they are at 0 in the middle, so you have to get used to this. If so, you have to watch a bit your MIDI value or whatever you're using. And actually, I was wrong. We should also map this first one because I thought we can take out the volume with this one, but of course not if we apply modulation. So I hope you can still follow me. You see it's a bit improvised. It's difficult to make this completely in the most organized way, but I think it's also a good description of how you work with this. So now we just use those 5 faders in a row. That should be better. And if we all make them neutral for the beginning, kind of neutral, we should only have the kick drum at the start. You can also, if you push this to the left side, just have some noise layer, which is also interesting. And now with the pulsar, we can play a bit with the speed, but it's interesting to have it on some lower value to not now bring in the variations. Now we could increase this randomness. Bring in a bit. See, now we only have the accent from the hi-hat without the notes in between, which is actually kind of cool. Now we can bring them in slowly. Increase a bit the craziness. I think this is a little too much right now. At some point, you'll be totally lost by what rhythm is actually happening. And sometimes you create those new rhythms coming out of nowhere. Now I was also lost for a second, but now it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. And you also see that sometimes you're hearing it differently than actually the metronome is counting. So it can get really freaky. And now I didn't even map the gravity section, but again, you see it's also a bit difficult to navigate speaking about this and figuring out. It always takes you a while to find a good setting, but I really hope this could just give you some kind of idea of how you can use it, because again, that's just a tiny, tiny glimpse of what's possible, and you always have to invest some time just diving into the sound and seeing what happens when, and sometimes there's just this one setting that is magical, and once you find it, you'll be super happy. And that should be also it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching, I really appreciate it. Be warmly invited to drop any questions, because as I said a couple of times, it's a little messy, like the video, because there are so many things to change and you need to have this kind of experimental mindset, but I gladly try to respond to your questions and try to answer them. As you saw, sometimes I'm also not 100% sure what's happening, but I kind of like this shady state. But yeah, I just gladly get in touch. Find it always really interesting to exchange just thoughts about those plugins and synthesizers. So don't hesitate to drop your comments there. If you liked it, I'd be super thankful if you could quickly hit the like button, since this always helps to show this video to a couple of more people. And you're also warmly invited to subscribe to my channel, because I made more videos also about the V collection, and also plan to make more videos about the V collection. And apart from that, I just wish you inspiration with whatever it is that you create, and really hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye.